Okay, now that the glue has had about an hour to dry, we can go ahead and take this out of the clamps and proceed with final planing. You could certainly let it set up longer than that or even overnight, but this isn't a very structural piece, and 1 hour is certainly long enough to cure sufficiently for our needs here. We've got the pins here, look to be at least 1/8 of an inch proud of the surface. Same thing with the tails. For this, I think I'll start off with my block plane here. Yeah. That's planing well. All right, everyone. It's the episode you've been waiting for, the grand finale. That's right, this will be the final episode in this series, so you'll get to see the finished product at the end. We're starting out by jointing the center divider. We need to make that piece before we go any further to include it in the project. Once it's flattened and jointed on one edge, we send her on through the planer to get it down to final thickness. It's about 1/2 inch. Oh, and you'll want to stay tuned to the end of this video to see a surprise reveal on how this grill caddy is actually being used today. Now that we have our little marky mark on the board, we go ahead and rip her to width on the table saw. And once said width is established, we are squaring up one end on the shooting board. Doing this so that we can fit it on the next step. And it is actually square. Yay! And now for the fitting, just gonna lay it on there and make a mark with a pen. Can't get much easier than this. Why use a tape measure? And to make that little cross cut that we just marked, we're going to go ahead and use what's called a bench hook. It's a little device that your board sits against. It's got a slot cut in it, and we're just going to grab the crosscut saw here. This is different from the Dovetail saw you saw me using earlier. The teeth on a crosscut saw are filed to cut across the grain and include things like fleam, and Dovetail saw is filed a rip cut. And if you don't know what those are, that's okay. But this is a handy little device. Sometimes it's easier than running all the way over to the miter saw, making a bunch of noise, making a bunch of sawdust, although we do still have a little bit of sawdust here to blow off the bench. And now we will go ahead and shoot the end that we just sawed on the bench hook, and then it'll be ready to fit in the piece. for some reason I decided not to do any talking in this video. Not really sure why. Previously I couldn't keep my mouth shut. Oh well. If you have any questions on what we're doing here, leave them in the comments below and I'll try to answer it. Now that our center divider is proven to actually fit, yay, we're going to go ahead and do the planing. And like we did the other parts, we're just going to hit it with the number 5.5. It's got a nice sharp blade on there, and it's really, this is a smoothing step. You could do it with the number 4.5, the actual smoother plane, but the blade wasn't sharp and I didn't want to deal with that. So this is just as good, and you'll notice we're actually not using a sander on this piece at all. The finish will be applied straight from the plane, and that's totally fine, especially the lacquer that we're going to be using. The wood does not care. And actually, using a hand plane finish like this will maximize the granular detail in the wood. Granular meaning grain, in contrast. Sounds like a good experiment, sanding versus planing. Might actually have to do that one. Hint, hint. Anyway, now we flip it over to the other side and do the other side. No big deal here. Run it across and just planing it until the shaving is the full width of the plane and length of the board, and then just sort of feeling it there to make sure there aren't any plane tracks. We're done. Now we will plane the edge. Get the saw marks from the table saw, the cutter marks from the jointer, you know, get those off of here. And since we're not using a sander, we need to do this. Very easy process. Again, we know that we're done when the shaving goes the length of the board. Flip it over and do the other side. Flipping it end to end like that, make sure that you continue planing with the grain, which if you start working with hand tools or hand planes, you will become very familiar with grain direction and what the wood will tolerate when it's being cut. It's actually the fun part of woodworking. IMO, of course. At this point in the process, I was really starting to wonder, how am I going to locate that center divider in the piece? Then it hit me. Make some standoffs. So that's what we're doing here. Just have some leftover dowel material from another project and going to size some standoffs. And we'll put those in the grill caddy and use that to locate the center divider in the center of the project. And now for some glue up fun, just using some Titebond 3 here and spreading it on the edge of the board. Then we will put the board in the piece, locate it with those standoffs that you can see in the shot, and I'm just actually going to clamp this directly to the workbench. I don't know, it just felt right. All right, while our center divider is drying there in the clamps, we're gonna go ahead and make some dowels in order to secure that on the end. And since this is 1/2 inch wood, I'm thinking a 3/16 inch dowel would be about right. Now I don't have any 3/16 inch dowel, and I don't have a jig to make a 3/16 inch dowel. Thus, we're going to make a jig. And I found an easy way to do that is just get some 4x4 pine and make it out of that. You could always glue two 2x4s together to get a 4-inch thick, well, really 3-inch thick piece. But if you have this, it works just as well. So I'm not going to go through it in detail and how to make this. It's really as simple as drilling a hole, but if you all want to see something like that, leave a comment down below. Let me know, and maybe I can do a video on it sometime. So even though I said I wasn't going to go into detail on how I made this jig, I ended up filming myself make the whole damn thing, so might as well show part of it here, sped up a little bit. Just jointing it, making it flat, making it smooth, making it pretty, and then at the drill press to drill the hole. Easy. Okay, now we take the 1/4-inch bit out. Oh, I'm doing quarter, by the way, instead of 3/16. I looked and this seems to work a little, I don't know, there's enough material there to handle that. So we'll take the 1/4-inch out and throw in a 3/8. I love this chuck. Not. And now we'll drill partway through. So this larger hole will allow us to insert the dowel in its larger uncut size. Should be about right. Now to the table saw. So this is the trickiest part of the dowel making jig process, if there is a tricky part to it. Basically, we're cutting partway through this block to expose the very top tangent of the hole that we drilled. And we're cutting partway through so we can create a little bit of a ledge on the block for a chisel to be clamped to it. And that will serve as the cutting mechanism to shave the dowel. I think you got a pretty good view of that earlier when we made the handle. So go back to that video and check that out if you want to see how it's used. But that's basically it. .25, dead nuts. All right, now that we've got the location of our dowels marked, we can go ahead and drill it out with a 1/4-inch bit. You may not be able to see those, but I promise you they're there. I marked the depth with a piece of tape on the drill bit. Handy little trick. And there we are. Now that we have our holes drilled, we can spread some glue on the dowel pieces and hammer them home. I also like to put just a little bit of glue in the holes just to make sure some gets driven towards the bottom. So the glue is now dry on our dowel joints. It has been for a while. So we'll go ahead and get those flush cut and planed down and everything looking good. But before we do that, I wanted to talk a little bit about how we're going to be attaching this handle. Now, I thought about several ways to do this. I thought maybe putting a knob on the end would be okay. But the more I looked at it and thought about that, I thought it would look bulky and out of place on this piece. So I really honed in on using a wedge. The key ways of ensuring that when you chop from this side and then chop from that side that they actually meet was to drill a hole. And that hole is the reference point for parallel through the dowel. The trick I used to make sure that this was vertical when I'm chopping is put a little dowel in the end, just like that, part of my 1/4-inch dowel, and then clamp it into the workbench here, kind of sighting down, making sure that it's vertical, and that way I could ensure that when I'm chiseling, I was mostly vertical. And so I brought it over here to my workbench, I put the dowel in, and I looked at it, and I went, that actually looks pretty good. And in that moment I made the decision, why even chop a mortise? Why go through the trouble with putting a wedge in here when we can just use a dowel? So what we're going to do is just use the 1/4-inch dowel. One piece will be in this side. The other side will actually be glued. And I have a little bit of a trick that I'm going to use to make sure that this dowel is removable so that you can still use it for a paper towel holder. We will simply, it's a little tough to remove all on its own, and I think with the seasons and expansion and contraction, it might get impossible to remove, at least without pliers, and I'd hate for the user to have to use pliers to remove this handle to install a new roll of paper towels. So we'll simply go in, sand half of it down, make it easy to insert until just the last moment when some friction will take over and just hold it there in place. And that is a simple solution to this. And there's no reason to do anything more difficult. And as a woodworker, that almost goes against my natural inclination. I'm always looking to make things sometimes more difficult than they need to be, and you don't always need to do that. So we'll go ahead and get the other hole drilled, get the dowels cut to size, get the taper set, and then we'll be done with the handle. So the first thing we'll do here is mark the location of the other side, and to do that I'm just going to set the one in, give ourselves maybe, 1/4 of an inch of movement, and just make a mark over here, just like that. Doesn't have to be exact to any specific measurement, just approximate. So go ahead and get this drilled at the drill press. There we go. Okay, now we can cut the ends of the dowels off. Just use a flush trim saw here. Makes easy work of this. Even with the flush cut saw, it still leaves some unsightly lines at times, which is kind of a pain, but we'll take care of those with the hand plane. All right, this is exciting because we are just about ready for finish. I've done a few things off camera here, but nothing you haven't already seen. After we trimmed the dowels flush, I took my smoothing plane, my number 4.5, this guy right here, and I sharpened the blade as sharp as I could humanly get it. And with that, I did one final pass over all of the outside surfaces. That made sure we got rid of any saw marks or anything that's gotten dinged up in the process of finishing this piece. Then I went ahead and tapered this dowel over here, just like I said, and now it works easily, removes, and that way we can remove the handle to change rolls of paper towels if we want to. And finally, after everything was done, I wiped this whole thing down with mineral spirits. And that's going to do a couple things. Number one, it's going to remove any sawdust from sanding that was left on the piece before we apply finish. And number two, it's going to expose any imperfections in the wood. So it's a great opportunity to give the piece one final look to make sure you're satisfied. So now all we have to do is let the mineral spirits dry, and then we're ready to apply our finish. And for this piece, we're going to be using spray lacquer. And since we're using lacquer, it's incredibly important that we let this fully dry before we apply spray. If we don't, the lacquer won't adhere to the surface because it does not mix with mineral spirits. If you were applying a spirits-based finish, like a tung oil or polyurethane, you could go ahead and start right now. So once this is dried, we'll get the spray can ready. We are there. We've made it to finishing. Woohoo! Now for this process, we're using spray lacquer. It's actually a semi-gloss. I typically prefer satin. However, I haven't been able to find satin in quite some time at my local Home Depot, so semi-gloss is what I have. And I'm using a technique here that I've developed over the years of application, and that is point the nozzle at the wood and pull the trigger. That is my method. Now granted, I do try to overlap strokes and try to keep it mostly horizontal, but that's it. Okay, this project is done, and boy am I happy with how it turned out. From the incorporation of the sapwood and the walnut and some of the figure on the ends, and the freehand curves on the sides, I think really came out nice. We also used single through dovetails to hold the side pieces in and left some of the layout process in the wood. We also made our own handle and wooden dowels out of walnut and maple, and those turned out really nice as well. So now all that's left is to put it to use. We can put a spatula in here, some killer hogs, barbecue rubs right here, salt and pepper shaker, and even some paper towels right in the handle. Just like that. So there you go. What do you guys think? Now this project is actually going to my dad for his birthday. So what's left for me is to wrap this up and put it in a box and get it in the mail. And his birthday is just a few days away, so I've got to be quick about that. But if you actually made it to the end of this video, please like and subscribe, and even consider leaving a comment below. Thanks. So I mentioned at the outset that there would be a surprise at the end, and here it is. This is how this project is being used today once it reached its final destination. Now it is still winter, so it's not really grilling season yet, but I have a feeling it may not be used as a grill caddy. Okay, this project is done, and boy, am I happy with how my light's not on. My friggin' light's not on.